Alright, I think I've got this down. I think I've got the ability to do this now. And this is going to be an interesting one. I'm hoping that you guys are ready for this. I came up with an analogy for describing how vaccines work, and it largely pertains to Magic the Gathering. I don't know if this is something that's going to be relevant at all, but I wanted to throw it at you guys and turn it into a video because I wanted to kind of explain the difference between traditional vaccines and mRNA vaccines, like how they work, why they work, and relate it to trading cards and see if maybe this would work. Okay, so before we do that, though, I need to show you guys this fan art. Fan art section at the beginning, as always. This one is from JacandQuil, and it reads, "Not safe to show at work? Whatever could you mean?" Because apparently my content's not safe for work. Or at the very least, certain assets on my character are not safe for work. Either way, thank you very, very much for the fan art submissions. If you guys want any of your fan art shown on a video going forward, the best way to do so is drop it into the fan art channel of the Discord. Anywho, on to the thing. So everybody knows the difference between a traditional vaccine and an mRNA vaccine, right? No? Okay, cool. That's why we're doing this video. So you've probably learned about traditional vaccines in school. At least I hope so. The way traditional vaccine works is we give you a weakened or dead version of a virus, and then your body grabs that virus's bloody corpse and looks at it, analyzes it, and says, "I don't like this thing." So it sees it, it knows that it's weaker, but it knows that it doesn't like it, and it goes, "Okay, cool. Now I'm going to know how to fight better in the future." Now, how an mRNA vaccine works is we synthesize the RNA strand that a virus uses, because viruses are built by RNA. So we synthesize the actual genome sequence for that virus, and then introduce the genome sequence into the body instead. And the reason it's called an mRNA, it has to do with one of the problems with RNA vaccines. The M stands for messenger. The large problem with mRNA vaccines is that, unlike a host body type vaccine, where we get to hand in a broken, dead carcass of a virus to you and have your body analyze it, we are handing you something much more delicate. We're handing you a tiny little sliver of, genome that's just not super strong. And we have a few ways of protecting it. We have a way of creating a packet around it that will let it be administered to you, and we have a way of changing some of the, from what I understand, codon sequences up that can make it to where the body does not recognize it as bad immediately, because your body has a couple of immunoresponses. There's a primary and secondary response, and then there's a bog standard response. The primary response is data collection. This is your body looking at a virus and saying, "I'm going to figure out what this is so I can figure out how to kill it because I don't like it." Your secondary response is your body killing the thing. But your bog standard response is what your body does to anything. It doesn't like a splinter you get, so it starts shoving pus in the wound and tries to eject the splinter. That's your body just immediately going, that's the bog standard immune system doing its thing. Primary and secondary, those are more specialized. So if that doesn't make any sense to you, maybe let me put this in a completely different way for those of you who play Magic the Gathering. Okay? Now, here is what we're going to do. We're going to play a game here. The game is called a card game. Now, you're entering a tournament for the first time. You've got your first deck of cards. You're ready to go and do whatever you want to do in the tournament. But you don't know what you're up against. So you enter that first round, and your opponent wipes the floor with you with a new deck that you don't understand. Right now, you're your body's immune system. You engaged in your secondary response, but you had no idea what you were fighting against. So the primary response, the data collection part, you had to do while fighting your opponent. Now, how many misplays do you think you made? How many ways do you think you fucked up merely because you didn't understand what your opponent's deck did? And you're fighting the full power version of that deck. it's going to be hard for you to figure out which cards to pick up, the ways to counter this deck, the ways to fix your sideboard up so that you can handle this. Because again, you fighting this deck, that's the body's secondary response. You learning how the deck works, that's your body's primary response. Now, in a controlled environment, let's say somebody's bringing a slightly less powerful version of the deck. There's a $100 card that's in that deck that makes it really consistent, but it's not as consistent without it, so you fight the weaker version of the deck as you're learning it. You can win against the deck a bit, but you feel for how the deck works. Let's say you've never fought elves before, and there's a weaker elves player at the tournament. You get to be adjusted by playing against that deck. You're doing the body's primary response. You're engaging in data collection. Now, there are other ways to engage in data collection. You can play against weakened versions of the deck. You can play against a full version of the deck, but in a controlled environment that doesn't have the risks and rewards of a tournament. Or you could go online and research the deck. All of those are an example of what your body's doing with its primary response. But you want to get cards. You want to get cards so you know how that deck works. Let's say that the way that you best fight against a deck, the way you best learn how to beat it, is by building that deck yourself so that you can play it for a bit, learn how it works, learn what it's weak to, and then that way when you fight it in the future, you've been in the other player's shoes. You know how to get in their head now. You know the things that upset you when you were playing that deck yourself. This kind of data collection is more akin to what happens with the mRNA vaccine. Instead of having a weakened or a controlled version of the virus, you have, functionally, all of the data required to analyze that 110% effectively. But the problem is you need to get those cards before you can build that deck and play with it. I know that this analogy doesn't work as well in the 21st century, where we have things like untapped.in and other ways of playing card games. Ignore all that. You want to build this deck in reality so that you can learn how it ticks, how it works. So you order the cards online. But remember, this is functioning like an mRNA vaccine. So the person who mails you your cards, they have now mailed you cards without top loaders. Now, what's a top loader? If you haven't played card games, a top loader is a sleeve of hard plastic which protects cards when they are being sent through the mail. Prevents them from getting shredded, prevents them from getting screwed up in any way, shape, or form. Now, your body wants to assemble this RNA that is here so it can categorize it, put it in its databank, and learn how to fight it, build an immune response to it, so that when another virus comes down the road, then it has the same sequence in its genome as the RNA that it's already categorized. It already knows how to dismantle it. Problem, though, the cards that you ordered were not sent in protection. So you get your mail from the U.S. Post Office, and the cards in it are bent, broken, shredded, or sometimes just not in there at all. They fell out in packaging or went through a shredder at some point. You have no idea. I've had this happen before. It's really awkward. So now you can't actually assemble this deck, and thus your method that you prefer of collecting data is not available to you anymore. You have to go order this deck again and hope that it doesn't get shredded on the way here. You see, your body's bog standard immunoresponse is doing what the post office is doing on accident. They're destroying your stuff because it's very fragile and it's not well protected. If you put the top loaders and sleeves on those cards, though, that's like the mRNA packet. That's like us changing the way that its code works so that the body will receive it and it can get... We either want to protect it enough so that the body's immunoresponse does not destroy it, or we want to make it coated so that it slips under the body's immunoresponse. Think of the way a sliver of glass works in your foot. Your body doesn't know it's a foreign object because it's not a porous object. It's very smooth, which is why glass stays in your body for so long before being removed. That's what we're trying to do with mRNA. We're trying to get it to slip under that primary response that destroys it by throwing white blood cells at it, so that the primary response can then happen. Your body can read that data. We want to protect the card or change the mechanism by which it is delivered. So somebody handing you the deck instead of you ordering it online. Either of these are analogous to how we're trying to get an mRNA vaccine to work. Now, the benefits to, and now we're moving away from the analogy. Hopefully the card game analogy made it easier to understand. Your body is you as a card game player going to a tournament. All the decks you're fighting against, those are the viruses you're trying to beat. You want the data on those viruses so that you can beat all of them. That data is either collected by fighting those previously or collecting the data in some other form. And you want that data so that you can beat all of those decks. That's how it works in Magic. That's how it works in your immune system. Now, what are the benefits of mRNA vaccines and some of the risks? Well, the risks are the things I already told you. It's very hard to make an mRNA vaccine in such a way that your body does not just try to destroy it immediately when it gets in the bloodstream. This is why we have such trouble getting mRNA vaccines to work. It's one of the two problems we face with them. The second problem we face is the problem of thermostability. A vaccine, when it is made, at least with mRNA vaccines right now, they have to be kept in refrigeration 24/7 right up until the point of administering them to you, which, of course, can make vaccine delivery a problem if power goes out at any point during delivery. You can destroy thousands of vials of vaccine on accident merely because power went out for a second. They're not shelf stable. They're not temperature stable. That's one of the problems we're trying to figure out right now. But for now, they're just very, very fragile. I mean, it sucks, but it's how it is. If now we talk about how a traditional vaccine works. I told you, we give you a weakened version of a virus or a dead version of a virus, and your body builds its data set from that. There are some flaws with this method, though, and it's some of the flaws that the mRNA method is trying to fix. What the regular vaccine does, what we do with standard vaccines, is we culture infection on things like chicken eggs. Now, you can already see some of the problems here. If multiple infections end up present, we don't have that pure bit of data the body needs, and we can end up causing issues. So we're constantly having to fight against the natural other infectious agents that are growing in those natural environments. We're having to try to find a way to fix those problems. mRNA lets us avoid this completely. And here's the other benefit to mRNA. Remember that I told you that with mRNA, the analogy with the Magic deck was that you are assembling that deck yourself so that you could play against it instead of playing against other people with whatever version of the decks they happen to have. That's exactly how it works with mRNA production for vaccines. You see, unlike taking a bit of infection and then trying to grow and culture that infection to such an amount that we can make a bunch of vaccines, what you do with an mRNA vaccine is different. You're reading the genome sequence. You're mapping the genome of the virus the same way you map the genome for a human being. And once you've mapped that genome, you artificially replicate that genome so that all of the data required to construct that virus is there and available. For your body's primary response, it doesn't give a shit which one it is as long as it's assembled correctly. It can take the assembled deck or it can take the corpse of a deck. It will play it either way and learn it. So, mRNA stuff is generally infinitely safer because we don't have the prior complications with manufacturing. The complications are delivery. One of the other benefits of this is that because we are synthesizing a virus, we're synthesizing its genome specifically, its RNA strand, we have the ability to create all kinds of vaccines for issues before they become pandemics. We have the ability to look at something that is a potential problem and go ahead and pre-vaccinate people for it if it looks like it might start getting out of hand. If we already have that mapped out, it's faster than growing stuff manually in cultures. That takes a lot of time. Synthesizing that data, it's a lot cheaper to produce a shit ton of those vials, and it's a lot faster. And I know that there's other vaccines that are being researched right now, things like a potential vaccine for stuff like HRV using the mRNA tech, which, remember, stands for messenger RNA. There's a lot of factors that go into how vaccines work, but hopefully the card game analogy helps it a little bit. Remember, your body's secondary response is you at that tournament. Its primary response is the data collection it used to prep for that tournament. The methods it used could have either been playing against different variants of that deck, or building the perfect version of that deck from the ground up, and then playing with it itself to learn how to beat it. The problems we run into is how those cards get there. And just like with how we have issues with growing vaccines on egg cultures, we can sometimes have problems building decks improperly to test against. If I'm building a weakened version of a deck, but I end up adding in a few extra cards that aren't in the most powerful version of that deck list, my testing is not going to be as good. The data that I'm gathering is not going to be as effective. There are problems in the data gathering, the exact same way there are problems if other infectious agents get introduced while we're trying to assemble a vaccine using, again, chicken eggs and standard methods of creating vaccines. But anyway, if you're a Magic player, maybe this wasn't gibberish to you. It clicked for me earlier today, and I figured that I needed to make a video about it and just talk about it. And if you didn't know how RNA vaccines work, if you didn't know how traditional vaccines work, maybe you've learned a little bit today. Either way, let me know in the comment section below. Let me know what you thought of this analogy, if you think it's useful, if you think it's overcomplicated. If it helps you at all, let me know, and I want to know. With that said, though, this was something that I was actually really excited to talk about, so I'm happy I did it. As always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, thank you so much for watching this video. It really means a lot to me. If you want access to behind-the-scenes content for the channel, please consider checking out my Patreon. I do weekly vlogs over there where I give real-life updates to what's going on behind the scenes on the channel, stuff that you don't really get over here and even on Twitch. Patreon also helps the channel's stability a whole lot. Without Patreon, I wouldn't be able to do this at all. Especially with the kind of content that I do, neither YouTube nor Twitch are the most stable sources of income. If you are a $20 and up patron, then you will be featured on the ending slides as shown in the beginning of the end credits. If you want to catch the streams where all this content comes from, then consider heading over to Twitch and following. And if you want to continue watching over here on YouTube, maybe consider clicking one of the end screen videos. And once again, I want to thank you so much for spending your time with me over on my channel. I wouldn't be able to do literally anything that I'm doing over here on YouTube without each and every one of you. So, thank you.